So welcome back to the session on human rights. In this session, we're going to be taking a more practical look at some of the human rights that we looked at last time. In particular, we're going to be seeing how these have been impacted by the coronavirus issue that is current at the moment. As usual, I'd like you to please introduce yourself using the microphone so that I can see who I have in the session with me. Let's look at our learning outcomes for the evening. By the end of this session, you should be able to understand the main areas protected by human rights law. You should understand how the coronavirus has impacted this area of law. And in particular, we're going to look at the new coronavirus regulations. And you should then be able to use that knowledge in practice to apply the regulations to 2 case studies, and then we'll do some evaluation together. So unless anyone has any questions, I'm going to start the session and we'll start looking at this detail. So remember, this relates to our key topic of human rights legislation and law. If you remember last time, we explored the 2 main areas that bring human rights law into our domestic legal situation. We spent quite a long time looking at the European Convention of Human Rights, and in preparation for this session this evening, I asked you to look again at some of the key areas of this particular area of law. And just a reminder of what we said in the previous session, that these areas have been effectively brought more immediately into our own domestic legislation by the Human Rights Act 1998. So it's a combination of the Convention and the Human Rights Act that make these articles current for us. So I'm going to show you a couple of clips, in many ways quite shocking clips, of some of the situations that are arising as a result of the coronavirus situation. The first clip is one that deals with the situation in China, where obviously the authorities have had to use quite severe legal restrictions. Now bear in mind, these are not covered by the European Convention on Human Rights, but nevertheless they are interesting in terms of how other areas have been dealing with this.
无人机啊，你不戴口罩就不要出去，不要乱跑，记得赶紧回家，回家洗洗手，对吧？注意一下卫生。 对吧？咱们村这么多人都说你都说不住，非得派无人机过来飞你，对吧？过几年也能收拾。
I'm just going to pause that clip there because it continues in much the same vein. It's quite an alarming clip, and you can see there that these people are being monitored via drone, and the drone is being operated by a remote operator who's speaking directly to the people and enforcing the lockdown in China. So let's have a look at this in terms of how the UK is responding to this.
Criticised, Derbyshire Police has defended this video it published last week, which used a drone to show people visiting the Peak District. A former Supreme Court judge called it disgraceful and says police have to separate government advice from enforceable laws.
They do not prevent people, for example, from driving to beauty spots to take their exercise there. They don't prevent people from buying things that the police might consider to be non-essential foods. They don't prevent all sorts of things that the police in some parts of the country have been trying to prevent.
But there is specific behaviour the police can enforce. They might send or take people back to where they live if they're out for anything other than daily exercise or picking up essential items. They can instruct groups of 3 or more to go home and can fine people who are outside without a valid reason.
Let's move, and this is section 6.1. During the emergency period, it says no person may leave the place where they're living without reasonable excuse. And then what do we mean by a reasonable excuse? This comes in 6A. To obtain basic necessities, including food and medical supplies for those in the same household, including any pets or animals in the household, or to obtain money. Now, I've cut that down slightly, but those are the main issues. Or B, to take exercise either alone or with other members of their household. So you have those regulations on the handout that I've sent you through in advance. So the first case study covers Sunita. She's gone shopping for her family during the coronavirus lockdown. She buys bread and milk as well as vegetables and pasta. She also buys a bottle of wine and 2 Easter eggs. PC Sampson stops her and searches her basket and claims that she's not buying basic necessities. She's fined £60. So we will obviously take this into our discussion shortly, along with the second case study. In this case, Adam has gone for a bicycle ride during the coronavirus lockdown. He sees a friend Martin on the road and they cycle in the same direction, but staying well apart. They're stopped by PC Burke, who tells Adam that she saw him cycling earlier in the day. Adam does not deny this. She also asks whether they're from the same family, and they tell her that they are not, so she fines them both £60. On the face of it, both PCs look as if they're on solid ground, but that's for our discussion to decide whether, in fact, they've acted lawfully. And at the end of our discussion, we would then move into a feedback session where students would bring in their comments and feedback, and we would then take some reflections on the situation as it stands at the moment. And I would finish by having a question and answer session